the tale of two sisters. Timid and Lamb were sisters. Timid was the elder of the two. Today we might suspect that she was anemic or maybe had some form of chronic illness, for her name Leah also meant weary or tired. In that day in which Timid lived, life was physically demanding for women, even for young women with a rich father. They carried endless jars of water from the local well, helped with the flocks and the herds, and carried out an endless list of domestic duties. Timid had soft and tender eyes. Some said that her eyes were weak. Others said they gave her the appearance of a lovely startled doe in the forest. She would not have been called beautiful, although she was not ugly. In the high school culture, Timid might have been a nerd or a geek, just one of the faceless, nameless crowd, just getting along, just getting through. It was hard for Timid to have a beautiful and vivacious younger sister. From the time she was born, Rachel was known as Daddy's little lamb, the meaning of her name, and she was often called Lamb by the entire household. Lamb was the girl that seemed to get everything. Life for her was easy and effortless. Although she might have become a spoiled brat, she was given plenty of work and seemed to get along well with almost everyone. So when the strangers showed up at the town well that day, claiming to be some long-lost cousin all the way from the lands in the west, who should he meet but little Lamb, out getting the family water. And much to Timid's dismay, the stranger, who turned out to be their cousin from their mother's side, fell in love with little Lamb. All summer we've been retelling the stories of the patriarchs in the book of Genesis. We've already heard how Abraham met Sarah, his wife, and Isaac, the laughing boy who married Rebekah, and the twins, Red and Heel, Jacob and Esau. The last 2 Sundays we heard the tale of Heel, the expert in deception, the trickster, who tricked his brother and his father to get the family birthright and the blessing. His reward was exile to save his life and a return to the old country from which his grandfather Abraham originally came. The first night away from home, Jacob had an unusual dream of the ladder from heaven to earth, bringing the promise that God, the God of his fathers, would be with him and bring him back to his homeland, the promised land. Today the story picks up as Jacob arrives in Haran. We must keep in mind that the readings we hear in church are only part of the story. Many details would take too long to read are left out. So I encourage you to pick up your Bible and turn to Genesis and read the entire story for yourself. This is a part of the Bible that's much easier to understand, as it reads more like a novel than a series of teachings. And the part of the story that comes just before this scene, Jacob, the heel, the trickster, arrived at the well. And in a scene reminiscent from the life of his mother, he offers to draw water for the flock of sheep, led by none other than the little lamb. Lamb ran home with the news that Heel was welcomed with embraces and a feast from his uncle Laban. The reunion lasted about a month, but it was soon evident that Heel was going to become more or less a permanent resident in Laban's household. Laban had been quite understanding at first, allowing Heel to rest and enjoy himself, but after a month passed, he called Heel and offered him a job with pay. But what to pay a kinsman who is almost like a son and yet not a son? So Laban asked Jacob what he thought a fair wage would be. Jacob had fallen in love with little lamb, so he offered to work 7 years to be married to little lamb. And Laban agreed, and they shook hands on the deal. 7 years passed, 7 long years for heel and lamb to exchange glances, to watch each other, to send little gifts, to share meals. Heel was so far gone that he would say that the years passed quickly because he was so in love with little lamb. The equivalent of 1 year seemed just like a week. Then came their wedding night, and a big surprise for Heel, the deceiver. It happened like this. Laban held a great feast. He gathered all his people together. According to the custom of the day, the bride's father would deliver her to the tent set aside for the happy couple, and the groom would, after a party that rivaled any of our modern-day bachelor parties, enter the tent, find his heavily veiled wife, and, well, the rest is left to your imagination and your good taste. And all went according to plan. Heel entered his bridal tent, found his veiled wife, did his husbandly duty, and promptly passed out. Only one problem. When he woke up the following morning, he expected to find lamb, but instead, Timid was in his bed. Laban's reply was a dismissal because the deceiver had been deceived. Heel was furious. But Laban explained it simply would not do, he said, to marry off the younger sister ahead of the older sister. So Heel was left with no alternative but to work 7 more years, 1 year for each day of the week, to win the hand of lamb. 7 long years later, lamb was the one that Heel found by his side the morning after the wedding. But the biblical narrative goes on to say that Heel loved Rachel more than Leah. In an ironic twist, Timid was the first to bear a child, and Lamb seemed to follow in the way of her grandmother by marriage, her mother-in-law, Sarah and Rebekah, and was barren. The rivalry between the two sisters continued for many years, Leah bearing more children, and both of the sisters offering their handmaids as surrogates, much the way their grandmother Sarah had offered her handmaid Hagar. Jacob ended up with a whole bunch of kids. Timid had 6 sons and 1 daughter, Dinah. Timid's maid Zilpah had 2 sons. Lamb's maid Bilhah had 2 sons. The rivalry was a bitter one, including one incident recorded in the Bible where the 2 sisters fought over a mandrake root, considered to be their equivalent of Viagra. Reuben, Timid's elder son and the firstborn, whose name meant, "See, a son," had brought the root to his mother. Lamb, now feeling much less a lamb than a shrew, demanded her share, whereupon Timid, much less timid now that she had the firstborn, demanded a price for the root and more uninterrupted nights with Heel. Each son born had a name that marked another victory for Timid, another moment of bitterness for Lamb. Finally, Lamb had a child she named the Sum, as in the sum of all the numbers, better known by us as Joseph. One might think that this portion of the tale of the 2 sisters would end there, but no. The convoluted story continued for 6 more years as Laban allowed Heel to become the master of his own flock of sheep. The payment was that at the end of 6 years, Heel would take all the sheep that were discolored, spotted, or striped. Those of not solid color were considered to be less valuable and even perhaps less healthy. But for 6 years, the deceiver, the Heel, was true to form. In an elaborate scheme of breeding, chronicled in detail in chapter 31 of Genesis, he made the flock produce an overabundance of discolored sheep.